a prisoner, who makes counterfeit stamps while inside a prison, but that's not the real story. The real story is that he himself is the world's most dangerous criminal, and no one knows. The story begins in a dark prison where a man, Lee, is sitting quietly. He has a piece of paper in front of him, meticulously handcrafting a counterfeit stamp. Lee is no ordinary prisoner but a highly skilled artist. He wants to send a letter to someone from inside the prison, but the problem is that sending a letter from here requires paying the prison postman $10, and Lee doesn't have any money. So he uses his astonishing skill and creates a counterfeit stamp himself. This stamp is so perfect that it's almost impossible to distinguish between the real and the fake. The postman arrives sometime later. Lee tries to give him the letter, but the postman demands money. Just then, an elderly prisoner in the cell opposite suddenly feigns illness and begins shouting loudly. The postman's attention is distracted, and Lee seizes the opportunity to secretly slip his letter into his bag. We learn at the end of the story who this letter is addressed to and what the secret behind it is. Shortly after, the police arrive and take Lee out of prison. It's revealed that he was previously imprisoned in a Thai prison, and that Inspector Ho of the Hong Kong police has now taken him into custody. In the interrogation room, Inspector Ho begins reading the charges against him. The first charge is counterfeiting currency. The second is the attack on a central bank vehicle on a Canadian highway 2 years ago, which killed approximately 7 guards. This is where the story takes a dangerous turn. Furthermore, several other attacks have occurred in the city since. The police suspect an international gang is behind all of this, and Lee is accused of direct involvement in all of these incidents. But Lee, as always, denies all the accusations. He repeatedly says the mastermind behind all this is a big-name mafia man named Painter. However, he can't provide any information about Painter's real name or where he can be found. Even today, in front of Inspector Ho, he doesn't utter a single meaningful word about Painter. Instead, his face shows immense fear. He cries, saying that Painter will find him and kill him, demanding that he be sent back to prison as soon as possible. The police then collect his blood and hair samples and match them with the DNA found at the crime scene, and the results show a perfect match with Lee. This means his guilt is now clear as day. The police again pressure him to confess the truth, but, as always, Lee refuses to admit everything. At that very moment, a girl named Yuan is waiting outside the police station. She has brought her lawyer to help secure Lee's bail, but the police flatly refuse, saying that Lee is a crucial witness in several high-profile cases. Therefore, bail will be impossible. However, they impose a condition: Lee will only be considered for bail if he reveals the painter's true identity. Then Yuan personally approaches Lee and urges him to tell the truth, and Lee immediately opens his mouth and begins recounting the events of the past. The scene then cuts to several years earlier. Here we see Lee and Yvonne for the first time. They were both artists and created magnificent paintings. Through art, they gradually grew closer and fell in love, but there was a significant difference between them. Yvonne was a creative artist who created original paintings in her own unique style. Lee, on the other hand, didn't create anything original. He simply copied the works of famous artists. His ability to copy was truly unbelievable, but the problem was that no one was interested in these duplicate paintings. This very power of copying would later lead him down a dangerous path. One day, an art gallery owner named Luck comes to see their paintings. He is impressed by Yun's work and wants to buy them all. However, he dislikes Lee's paintings because they were copies of others' work. Luck refuses to include them in his exhibition. Then Yuan insists that she must buy all the paintings at once, or she won't sell a single one. After Luke leaves, Lee tells Yuan, "Don't worry about me. A man from Tokyo has already bought all my paintings." But after a while, Yuan realizes that Lee is lying. Not a single one of her paintings was sold. In fact, Lee wanted to prevent her from hindering Yuan's career. On the day of the exhibition, Yuan secretly places one of Lee's paintings next to her own. Everyone was praising her work. Suddenly, a man came and started mocking Lee's painting. Seeing this, Yuan became so angry that she threw water on him. However, after the exhibition ended, Lee went to apologize to the man. The man laughed and said that he was just joking so that Lee would come to meet him alone, because the only painting he had bought from the entire exhibition was Lee's. Afterward, they sit in a restaurant and talk for a long time. The man introduces himself as a painter. Yes, this is the same painter whose name Lee had repeatedly mentioned to the police. The painter praises Lee, saying that copying a painting like this is no small feat. He directly offers, "Your talent will be of great use to me." The next day, Lee meets the painter. This time, Lee's attitude has changed. He clearly states that he is now ready to accept any offer. The painter smiles and welcomes him to join his team, but as soon as he explains the real job, Lee is devastated. The painter hands him a $1 bill and says, "You have to reproduce it exactly." Clearly, he is asking Lee to forge it. Hearing this, Lee becomes enraged and immediately rejects the offer. Then the painter slowly reveals his true identity. His name is Seng, and his family has been in the counterfeiting business for 3 generations. He claims that no one has ever been caught in all these years because they do everything with utmost care and planning. Now the question arises, will Lee embark on this dangerous path? The painter tries to convince him. He explains that the design of the new dollar note is so intricate that even the most expensive printers cannot match it. That's why they need an artist like Lee, whose hands possess incredible detail and perfection. Lee initially refuses, but when he considers his dire financial situation, he finally changes his mind. At that time, Yuan was traveling to America for an exhibition, so Lee quietly leaves without telling her anything. Meanwhile, the painter takes him on a plane to Canada. There he introduces Lee to his entire team, which includes some masters with 20 years of experience in counterfeiting. Each one is an expert at something. They all sit down to devise a grand plan to counterfeit the currency. This is where we realize that copying the American dollar is no child's play. Each US dollar bears a portrait of Benjamin Franklin, and this portrait is created using many intricate layers. Franklin's collar bears the words United States of America in tiny letters. The US government has added several more security layers to the new notes, making it impossible to copy them without intricate painting or advanced printing. Furthermore, the notes use a special ink that appears purple when viewed from one side and golden when viewed from the other. This phenomenon is called the Moire effect, meaning the ink has a color-changing effect. This means that to create this note, they must source both genuine paper and this special ink. Now, the entire team of painters begins to brainstorm solutions to these problems. The biggest challenge was applying the watermark. To do this, they planned to paint on 3 different layers, following the technique of ancient Chinese artists. The middle layer will be meticulously set with watermarks. Lee will have to complete this entire task by hand. Before starting the main work, Lee prepares some practice notes. He draws the notes with such perfection that everyone on the team is completely amazed by his work. After practicing for a few days, they suddenly travel to Eastern Europe. There, a machine for printing old banknotes was being sold at an auction, and they purchase it. The question arises, where will they get paper like real banknotes? The painter then reveals a surprising piece of information. He explains that the telephone directory is made using the same quality paper as the US government's banknotes. Upon hearing this, they go to the printing press and purchase 500 tons of paper directly from the owner. Using these papers, they begin printing counterfeit notes according to Lee's design. The massive machine purchased at auction begins printing note after note. These notes look exactly like real ones. But one major problem remains, the color-changing Moire effect. The special ink required for this is only available at government offices, and to obtain it, Painter hatches a daring plan. Painter and his team launch a direct attack on a central bank vehicle. The vehicle contains several barrels of the color-changing ink, and Painter had come to rob them. Despite his reluctance, Lee is forced to accompany him on this mission. During the attempt to snatch the vehicle, the guards open fire, and Painter's gang retaliates. Poor Lee is caught in the crossfire. Suddenly, a guard points a gun at him, but just then, Painter arrives and shoots the guard. He then detonates a bomb that blows up a vehicle in the distance, killing the remaining guards. They then steal the ink barrels and quickly flee the scene, but amidst all this, Lee's heart trembles at the sight of Painter's violent side for the first time. Until now, he had been making counterfeit notes with fear, but he never imagined he would be complicit in the bloodshed. But now he finds himself trapped in a quagmire with no way out. After obtaining the Moire effect ink, they put it into the printer and begin printing notes again. Each note that comes out displays the same color-changing effect as the real notes. Seeing this, the entire team jumps with joy. as they have created something undistinguishable from the real notes. But deep inside, Lee feels immense guilt. He asks the painter, "When the ink runs out, will I have to kill people again to get it? It's better to try making it myself." But the painter hears him out and slams him. Now, on the painter's orders, his men begin smuggling counterfeit currency into different countries, packing it in suitcases. Thus their counterfeit money empire grows by the day. But the police have already caught wind of their activities. An undercover police officer named Wing is assigned to investigate the case. Wing, along with Inspector Ho, begins following the movements of the painter's gang. Then, disguised as a buyer, they go directly to meet the gang members. The painter's men are partying on a boat in the middle of the ocean. However, the painter and Lee are not present. Wing observes everything and then leaves. But the painter's real game has yet to begin. The painter sets up a meeting with an old client named General. The next day, he takes Lee with him to the General's house. On the way, Lee tells the painter something important. He says he knows of a special kind of carpenter who can create a peacock effect. This means that this ink can create a two-color effect from two different angles on a dollar bill without having to kill anyone. The painter is overjoyed by Lee's idea. He promises that after the work is completed, he will buy a luxurious resort in Lee's name, where he can spend the rest of his life peacefully with Yvonne. But then the atmosphere suddenly changes. The painter hands Lee a remote control and says in a cold voice, "Press this button only on my command." A short while later, they arrive at the General's house, where the meeting begins as usual. The General offers Painter a good deal to buy counterfeit currency and suggests he move in with his entire team for 6 months so he can train his men. Then, laughing, he says something that completely changes the atmosphere. If your father were alive, he would have agreed to this deal immediately. Upon hearing this, Painter's face transforms into a terrifying one. He slowly rises from his chair, approaches the General, and whispers in his ear, "7 years ago you killed my father." Now the General understands that Painter is here not for business but for revenge. Painter opens his shirt to reveal bombs strapped all over his body. He yells loudly and orders Lee to press the remote, but Lee, trembling with fear, can't even lift his hand. Under Painter's harsh voice and pressure, the remote falls from Lee's hand and falls to the ground, and the button is pressed as he falls. But the explosion isn't caused by the bombs strapped to the painter's body, because they were actually fake. The actual blast occurs in the painter's car parked outside. The explosion is so powerful that several of the General's men are killed on the spot. The others panic and rush inside, firing at the painter without delay. But the painter, holding 2 pistols in each hand, fires with such force that people fall to the ground one after another. But this was just the beginning, because the General was no novice. But the painter had already prepared for this. One of his companions begins firing a rocket launcher continuously from a distant forest. The rocket launchers blow everything up, engulfing the entire area in flames. Amidst the smoke and destruction, the painter takes 2 rifles and eliminates more people. Then, some of his companions arrive in vehicles and begin crushing the General's men. Meanwhile, some of the General's men enter the forest and kill the man operating the rocket launcher. Amidst all this, poor Lee is huddled in a corner trying to save his life. The gunfight continues for quite some time. Finally, the General himself arrives in an armored car and begins firing directly at the painter. But the painter, with a spectacular style, jumps out and fires at him, hitting the vehicle with perfect accuracy, overturning it. Thus he finishes off the General as well. However, during this battle, a girl named Ching, who worked for the General, catches fire. Lee rushes to the scene and extinguishes the fire, but by then her face is badly burned. On his way back, the painter takes her to the hospital and then detonates the bomb, destroying the General's entire hideout. After about a month, Ching slowly recovers from her injuries. The painter gives her a new ID and passport, which reads her name as Yuan. This angers Lee, as Yuan is his girlfriend's name. However, the painter ignores her advances. Thus, with her new identity, Ching joins the painter's gang and gradually becomes attracted to Lee. However, Lee doesn't pay much attention to these things. One day, they all go to see Yvonne's art show. The painter tells Lee that he has arranged a resort for her, and that he will now be able to live a happy and peaceful life with Yvonne. But Lee sadly asks if Yvonne will enjoy living in a resort bought by a criminal. Just then, they learn that Yvonne is going to marry Luke, the owner of the art gallery. Lee hadn't had any contact with Yvonne for a long time. which is why Yvonne couldn't wait any longer and entered into a relationship with Luke. Upon learning this news, Lee quietly leaves the gallery and tells the painter that he and Ching want to leave the gang. The painter becomes furious, swearing at him, and says he can only leave once he finishes the ink production. Meanwhile, the undercover officer Wing, now disguised as a buffalo, wants to meet the painter directly, but the painter already has his suspicions. He investigates and discovers that one of his gang members, named Uncle Yan, purchased a watch using counterfeit notes he had made. The painter's gang has a strict rule that no one can purchase anything with their own counterfeit notes. This means Yan has broken the rules, and because of his mistake, the police have discovered their activities. Therefore, the painter wants to punish Yan. Yan falls before him, pleading for the lives of his wife and daughter because the painter has another terrifying rule. If anyone makes a mistake, their family will be destroyed. But the painter ignores Yan's cries and cold-bloodedly shoots him. Seeing this brutal murder, Lee loses his composure and immediately pounces on the painter, but painter fires a bullet near his ear and punches him hard in the face. Meanwhile, Wing returns to meet painter in disguise, but painter, already aware of his plans, suddenly tells Lee to shoot Wing during their conversation, but this time Lee fails to move. Finally, painter shoots Wing himself. He then becomes even more enraged at Lee and reveals something that sends a chill through Lee's body. Painter reveals that he is currently holding Yvonne and her future husband Luke hostage. This man allegedly kidnapped Yvonne and Luke just to blackmail Lee. Painter tells Lee to shoot Luke directly, but Lee refuses. Instead, he points the pistol at Painter. The trigger is pulled, resulting in a wild firefight, killing Luke. A fierce gunfight ensues between Painter and Lee. Meanwhile, Ching arrives and begins eliminating Painter's men one by one. Finally, Lee shoots Painter squarely in the chest, killing him. Meanwhile, Lee tries to save Yuan, but Ching stops him by threatening to kill Yuan. Ching, in fact, had become deeply attracted to Lee, and she didn't want to let Yuan go to Lee under any circumstances. Lee has no other option but to abandon Yuan and flee. He then takes the bag of money and heads to the resort Painter had bought for him. The next morning, Lee reads in the newspaper that the police haven't found Painter's body. The only thought that comes to his mind is that perhaps Painter isn't dead after all, and he'll take revenge by killing Yuan. So Lee rushes to save Yuan, but then, while trying to escape, he's caught by the police. This is where the story picks up again from what we saw at the beginning. The police place a condition on Lee. He can only be granted bail if he reveals the entire truth about the painter. Meanwhile, the very woman Lee left behind, Yuan, comes to his rescue. In fact, Lee had written a letter to her from prison apologizing. Remember the letter with the fake stamp at the beginning? That letter was addressed to Yuan. At Yuan's advice, Lee finally breaks down and tells the police the truth about the painter from beginning to end. The police then have him draw a sketch of the painter. With Lee's help, the sketch is created, and based on this, he is granted bail. The police drop him off at a hotel where Lee and Yuan meet face to face. Lee apologizes profusely, and they share an emotional and romantic moment. But then the story takes another major twist. Inspector Ho spots a man wearing a police uniform, and his face exactly matches Lee's sketch of the painter. Shockingly, the man calmly walks into the police station. Inspector Ho, along with his team, apprehends him without delay. Everyone thinks they've finally caught the country's most wanted criminal. But the man exclaims in surprise, "When did I become a criminal? I'm just an ordinary police constable." When he shows his ID, Inspector Ho's face turns utterly stunned. At that very moment, he realizes that Lee has been fooling everyone with a clever lie all this time. But believe me, the real truth is yet to come, and it's so shocking that you'll be stunned. Have you figured it out yet? The terrifying painter whose story has been told all this time is actually none other than Lee himself. From designing counterfeit currency to attacking the central bank's vehicle to carrying out the massacre at the general's hideout, he orchestrated everything single-handedly. But to protect himself, he pretended to be innocent in front of the police, creating a fictional character named Painter, and sketching the face of the poor police constable he saw on duty at the time of his arrest. Imagine throughout the movie we were led to believe Lee was an innocent artist who was forced into this crime, when he was the real mastermind of the entire operation. And yet, the even more horrifying truth is that Lee never met Yuan after returning from China. The girl who came to the police station to rescue him and the one he was with at the hotel wasn't actually Yuan. She was Ching, whom Li had undergone plastic surgery to give Yuan's face. Remember, during the battle at the general's hideout, Ching's face was burned. Immediately afterward, Li had her remade to resemble Yuan because he could never get hold of the real Yuan. So he took Ching as Yuan and kept her with him. The next day, Ching, disguised as Yuan, becomes utterly enraged. She realizes that Li never loved her as Ching, he was merely searching for Yuan's face within her. In this rage, Ching kidnaps the real Yuan and her boyfriend Luke and tells Li, "If you really love me, kill them." A gunfight ensues and Luke is killed in the ensuing gunfight. When Li escapes, the police apprehend him. However, Ching comes to his rescue again, as Li had written a letter from prison apologizing to him. Upon learning the truth, Inspector Ho immediately rushes to the hotel, but it's too late. Li and Ching have already escaped, killing all the hotel guards. They are now on a boat sailing far away from Hong Kong, but then Ching suddenly reveals something that breaks Li's heart. Ching reveals that she's deliberately circling the boat and that before coming here she wrote the boat's number on a lighter so the police could easily find them. The reason for this is because Ching understood that Li would never love her. He only loves the Yvonne in her face. This means Ching also wants revenge on Li. Then Li sees that the police have surrounded them from all sides. He tries to speed away and escape, but Ching had already hidden explosives in the boat. She pulls the trigger, and with a powerful explosion, the entire boat erupts into a ball of fire, ultimately engulfing them both. After Li's death, Inspector Ho goes to the real Yvonne. He tells her that they have identified the painter. Yvonne didn't even know Li was the real painter because she was blindfolded during the kidnapping. When Inspector Ho shows her a photo of Li, she says, "Yes, I know this man. He used to be my neighbor." This means that there was never a relationship between Li and Yvonne. His love was completely one-sided, and he never expressed his feelings to Yvonne. He was so obsessed with her that he wanted to become an artist like Yvonne. But becoming an original artist like her was beyond Li's power, so he chose the wrong path by using his tremendous copying skills. His plan was to earn a lot of money and one day stand tall in front of Yvonne, but that dream too eventually turned to ashes. Pieces of the boat scattered in the dark waters of the ocean, ashes of burning paper, and this futile end to a brilliant talent. The one he loved didn't even know him, and the one he loved never appreciated. And that's where the story ends. The lioness is intoxicated with grief. To no new story,